6, 6 being the dissection of the heart. We're talking about the heart and the associated vessels. Yesterday we labeled the chambers of your heart, the valves of your heart, and the blood vessels that are attached to your heart. Today we are going to talk about blood flow. So where is blood flowing? Which is the direction that it's going in? Typically, when we talk about your heart, we always start with this structure, the superior and inferior vena cava, because that is the thing that brings blood into your heart sort of first. Now, is there really a first or a second or a third? Well, it's a big circle, so not really. But we're starting sort of on one side of your heart instead of in the middle of your heart. So if I'm going to talk about blood flow, this is the order in which blood is flowing. So it will come in there. So that is the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. They both are connected to the right atrium. So I would recommend that on your picture of the heart, you put these little arrows because that is showing which way the blood is flowing. In addition, I am purposefully making these arrows blue because this side of the heart does not have oxygenated blood. After the right atrium, the blood flows through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. After the right ventricle, blood flows up through the pulmonary semilunar valve. And once it does that, it goes into your pulmonary artery. And there were two pieces of that. It was piece number 3 and piece number 9. Now, it's not on this picture, but we know that the pulmonary artery is going to your lungs. So we're just going to imagine that the lungs are out here on the side. So after the blood goes through my pulmonary artery, it arrives at my lungs. And this is the point where something changes. Lungs, like we saw in the last chapter, accomplish part of respiration. So this is external respiration. At your lungs, gases are going to be exchanged. The CO2 that would be in your blood will leave, and oxygen from the air will diffuse into your blood. So after leaving the lungs, I'm going to change the color of my arrow to red. After the lungs, blood goes to the pulmonary veins. So remember, there were two sort of branches of pulmonary vein on each side, number 4 and number 10. After the pulmonary vein, blood is in the left atrium. Now blood will go from the left atrium through the bicuspid valve down into the left ventricle. Then blood will go up through the aortic semilunar valve, which leads to the aorta, which is up there and down here. The word dorsal is a position word. Dorsal means on the back. The word ventral is the word that means on the front. Really, we're talking about, is it closer to your stomach or closer to your back? But it goes to the aorta, which is kind of at the back, and then it branches off from there and goes to your body parts. So it is important to know in which order blood is flowing. Now you could do this with a picture of the heart. You could do it with words, like I've done on the right side. And I'm going to make another type of sort of visual organizer that's not an anatomical picture of the heart, which sometimes people find difficult to interpret, just so that you can get the path down. I guess the other thing that I'll mention here, so we don't have to do it later, anywhere the arrows are red, blood is oxygenated. Anywhere arrows are blue, blood is deoxygenated. So in general, you can see the right side of the heart does not have the oxygenated blood. It's the left side that does. So what I'll do next is show you a different way that you could represent with sort of a picture how blood is flowing. You might want to have your notes out or a piece of paper that you can write it on. We're going to draw squares and arrows. It's not going to be elaborate. I know for me, redrawing an anatomical diagram is hard. I suck at drawing. And so I like to make ways that I can still use a visual aid, but not have to be a really good artist to do it. So when I think about the heart, I think about the fact that there are 4 chambers. And instead of drawing them anatomically, I draw a box and split it up into 4 squares because I'm physically able to do that. This would be my right atrium, my right ventricle, my left atrium, my left ventricle. So I have 4 chambers of my heart. I know that there are valves, and the valves are in these spots. So the bottom of each chamber has a valve on my little picture. So there's a valve between the right atrium and ventricle and between the left atrium and ventricle. There's also a valve between each ventricle and a blood vessel. So this one is called the tricuspid valve. This one is called the bicuspid valve. I wish it was the other way around because then it would be alphabetical, but it's not. The other valves are a little easier because if you know the artery that they're attached to, then you know the name of the valve. The right ventricle is attached to the pulmonary valve, and the left ventricle is attached to the aortic valve. Now, besides 4 chambers and 4 valves, I know that there are 4 major blood vessels. There are blood vessels that come in to the atrium from both sides. And there are blood vessels that leave each ventricle. So those are my 4 blood vessels. I know that the ones on the top, the ones that are attached to atria, are both veins. And the ones on the bottom, the ones that are attached to ventricles, are both arteries. So the thing that's left for me to fill in is what's the name of those vessels. This vein is the Vena Cava. This vein is the pulmonary vein. The artery that leaves the right ventricle is the pulmonary artery. And so I know that my lungs should be over here. What would go over on this other side? Well, it's the aorta that is leaving the left ventricle. So we would put just generally body tissues. Any cells other than your lungs are getting their blood from the aorta or from a branch off of the aorta. So this is a way that you could represent how blood flows without the anatomical picture of the heart. Usually we start somewhere up here in the picture with the vena cava. We know that blood will flow in this direction to the lungs. And then after blood goes through the lungs, it gets oxygen. It flows through this side of the heart and out to your body tissues. So it's important that you could put these pieces in order. There's not an official starting and ending point, so I would give you a starting point. I would say something like, starting with the vena cava, where does blood flow in order? So you would say, well, after vena cava, right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, pulmonary valve. It would be unusual, I won't ask you to do the entire path all at once. That would be ridiculous. That'd be a really long question. I would ask you maybe to do 4 in a row, like a numeric response question could be set up. That would be very realistic. It's also really important that you recognize where there is oxygen and where there is not oxygen. And so I like to use blue and red. Blue for the veins, the deoxygenated blood. Red for, in general, arteries, the oxygenated blood. I do want you to notice something, though. We'll talk about this after we dissect the heart and we do a couple more lessons. But the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein are weird. That vein has oxygenated blood, which is unusual. It is the exception to the rule about veins don't have oxygen in the blood. The pulmonary artery is deoxygenated. That's the exception to the rule arteries have oxygenated blood. So I'm putting a little star here for now. As part of the lesson that we'll do on Tuesday of next week, we will go over that again. But the idea is those blood vessels are the ones that connect your heart to your lungs, and that's why they sort of have the opposite oxygenation. Arteries always leave your heart. That artery, though, hasn't gone to your lungs yet, so it doesn't have oxygen. So I'm just going to reiterate this. I said this already, this idea about deoxygenated versus oxygenated blood. But just so we're clear, the right side of the heart is deoxygenated. That's the part of the blood that hasn't gone to your lungs yet. The left side of the heart always has oxygenated blood, because that blood has already been to your lungs and picked up some oxygen. The other thing that will become important when we start talking about your heart functioning is that the atria and the ventricles always do things simultaneously. So your left and your right atria always contract at the same time. Your left and your right ventricles always contract at the same time. And so there's quite a bit of symmetry in your heart. Now, it's important that that happens for blood flow to work. If blood moved, let's say from my right atrium to my right ventricle, but blood wasn't moving over here, there would be like a backflow. It would be like a traffic jam. So the left and right side of your heart are always working in sync. Whatever's happening on the left happens in the equivalent structure on the right. So if blood is moving from atria to ventricle on the right, it's doing the same thing on the left. If blood is moving from a ventricle to an artery on the right, it's doing the same thing on the left. If blood is entering your atria on the right, blood will be entering the atria on the left. So whatever's happening on the left side is happening at the same time on the right side. You got to think about it like the flow of traffic. If one side stops, then everything that comes behind it would slow down as well.